So good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here to this webinar on green economy and rural livelihoods in Africa, policies and implementation pathways. I'm delighted to be moderating this session. And today we have a distinguished panel of speakers who will be joining us from different contexts and from talking about aspects of this topic. This webinar contributes to a growing and timely conversation about how green economy approaches can support sustainable and inclusive development across Africa, particularly within rural areas where livelihoods are mostly intertwined with natural resources, agricultural systems, and environmental conditions. As we know, rural communities across the continent play a significant role in agriculture, food production, and also in biodiversity and natural resource management. Yet they're also very vulnerable to the impact of climate change and environmental degradation. We've seen an increase in flooding, we've seen drought and some other vagaries of the climate. So this makes it especially critical to rethink and develop how development pathways can simultaneously support economic growth, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion across the continent. So today's sessions aim to strengthen our collective and understanding of how green economic strategies can help transform rural livelihoods. So we will explore these approaches, how these approaches can contribute to building climate resilient communities, increasing incomes and reducing environmental vulnerability while also advancing broader sustainable development goals. So without further ado, I'll give way to the presenters. So you have 12 minutes each. So I want everyone to please write down your questions. And after that, we can then have an overview of the talks and then open up for questions. Yeah, good afternoon. We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you to our moderator and everyone that will be presenting this afternoon and those joining us. I want to appreciate everyone for making out time to join this conversation this afternoon. I'll be discussing some of my research activities around green technologies and climate action for sustainable rural livelihoods, and I'll be discussing based on some evidence from the Great Green Wall initiatives in Nigeria. I am a postdoc student or research fellow at the Center for the Study of Race, Gender, and Class. So once again, thank you for joining us and thank you for being here. So I have 4 frames on my screen showing different situations of climate condition and climate action. On screen 1, I have drought impacts on the land, the agricultural land, such that with dry lands, ability to cultivate crops becomes difficult when there is no rainfall. On frame 2, I have the effects of gully erosions and flooding affecting the land as a result of climate impact, which will also affect agricultural production. And on frame 3, I have a picture of desert encroachments gradually eating up the agricultural land. And then on frame 4 is a pushback. How do we reverse the situation? How do we see that we push the desert backwards by ensuring that the land becomes fertile again for agricultural activities? And that's what I'll call greening the environment this afternoon, or what we'll be talking about. And most of Africa, or about 22 African countries along the Sahel region, are affected by climate impact, desertification, and land degradation. And the African Union committed to addressing this problem by restoring degraded lands and strengthening livelihoods across these countries. Nigeria was is also committed to that vision, and it's an enormous problem because data showed that the cost of the damage caused by degradation is highest in Ethiopia, and Nigeria following shortly with about on the upper limit $17 million to address that problem, or the cost of the damage itself. And then to restore the land, Nigeria also rated highest for that. We have an upper limit of over $20 million required. Now in Nigeria, 11 states are affected by land degradation and desertification. To address this in line with the African Union's commitment, the National Agency for the Great Green Wall was established, which implemented several programs to address the problem, ranging from climate smart agriculture, those focused on livelihoods, afforestation, and all of that. Now, I have carried out a number of research to look at what this agency has been doing in addressing this problem. Though their strategies are diverse, but my research looked at the livelihood dimension. What are they doing to see that the livelihoods of communities, rural households, are sustained, to make them resilient, to be able to survive climate impacts? Some of my research activities revolve around looking at how the interventions of the agency address livelihood diversification, improving livelihood capital of affected households, and where these interventions are carried out, where the committee members, their consent sought, and is there a guarantee that there's tenure security in the implementations of this program? And of course, also looked at in benefit sharing, who benefits more? Is it the committee members? How is benefit distributed? Essentially, I've carried out this research in 3 states in Nigeria, Gombe, Kebbi, and Sokoto states. I had some quantitative research surveys where I looked at the impact or effect of these interventions on livelihood diversification as well as livelihood capital. And for the other 2 key questions I raised, I engaged stakeholders ranging from community leaders, women to youth leaders, down to institutions, to community civil society organizations. Now, basically, what this agency does in addressing the climate impacts along the Sahel, I categorized into 4. One is capacity building programs that focus on agro-based and non-agro-based interventions. And those that benefited from these trainings were empowered by giving them starter packs to enhance their capacities or resilience. And apart from individuals that benefited from the trainings being empowered, some empowerment were also directly made to community members. For example, energy-saving cooking stoves were provided for women. And in some cases, solar-powered boreholes provided for some of these communities, solar panels, and for some communities where water is a serious challenge, tube wells were provided. Now, from a general angle, what I found was that each of these approaches that this agency used in addressing this problem, they all have potentials for improving livelihood diversification, that beneficiaries of these interventions, their livelihoods, they were able to diversify beyond agriculture in particular. And even within the agricultural system, they had more alternatives. So that was something that was realized from my findings. However, one major challenge I realized or discovered in the course of this work was that the number of beneficiaries of these interventions were very few. So where you have very few people benefiting from these interventions compared to the larger community, what happens to the rest? So it will become very difficult to conclude the success of the interventions when you have very limited people as beneficiaries. Now, also from the effects of the interventions on the livelihood capitals of these people, whether physical, human, natural, financial, or social, I looked at beneficiaries and then non-beneficiaries. From my study, I realized, or I discovered, that the livelihood capital of beneficiaries increased. Unfortunately, for the non-beneficiaries, there was a decline in their livelihood capital. That also showed the escalated effects of climate on them, evident in the society, because that region is seriously affected by resource conflicts, and we have a farmers-herders conflict and all of that, which would have led to the dwindling of the potentials or livelihood potentials of the non-beneficiaries in that area. Now, for the consent and tenure security study that I did, interviewing stakeholders in these communities, some of these communities have benefited from the activities of this scheme. Some of my findings are that the community consent was generally obtained before projects were implemented. However, there were serious issues of land tenure during implementation, issues of disputes, conflicts over land ownership, and all of that. Those were there. And nevertheless, in the beneficiaries or the people I interviewed subscribed to the positive benefits of the interventions, creating job opportunities and skills for some people, leading to environmental restoration. And for communities with serious water challenges, they had boreholes and the solar lighting system they provided for some of them. Now, for the right-based and inclusive approaches, who benefits more from these interventions? Decision-making power from my studies concentrated among a few influential people. While women and youth participate in decision-making, they do not have much influence over final decisions. And final decisions, in most cases, were culturally driven, in some of these communities. The youth benefit more from employment opportunities in semi-formal systems, while women were targeted more for skills acquisition programs. In all of this, for who benefits more, elite capture was evident. Influential individuals in these communities enjoy greater benefits than those for whom these programs ideally would have benefited. Now, in conclusion, in Nigeria, along the Sahel states in Nigeria, which I know is also might be a similar situation being faced by the other countries affected in Africa, climate change is evident. Environmental degradation will continue unless addressed, and agricultural lands will become more marginal and unable to sustain rural livelihoods. This will not only affect the rural areas, but urban food security will also be affected, knowing that in this part of the world, most of the food we eat come from our rural communities. What should we do? We have to green our environment. It is important for whether academics, industry practitioners, development partners, we all have one role or the other to play to see that this problem is addressed. What we want to see is, we do not want to see the desert encroaching into our green lands. We want to push back. We want to green our landscape to ensure that there is improved livelihoods for rural communities and economic prosperity. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cecy Balogun, and thank you for keeping to time. So our next speaker will be Carlo Azzarri, and the title of the project is Green Technologies and Climate Smart Innovations for Rural Livelihoods. Over to you, Carlo.
Sure. Okay, so I think there was a little bit of a mix-up. So the title of my talk is Policy Coherence for an Inclusive Green Economy, and I will present the case of the Africa Rising program. My name is Carlo Azzarri from IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute, and I'm a senior research fellow in the Agri-Food Innovation and Resilience Unit. So let me give you a little bit of context and rationale first. So Africa Rising was a large program. Now it ended that tried to address food insecurity, poverty, environmental sustainability. In general, try to improve livelihoods through sustainable agriculture intensification. Mostly in 5 countries, so Ethiopia, Ghana, Malawi, Mali, and Tanzania. Zambia was brought in later, a little bit later in the game. So the level of interaction and in the program of the program in Zambia was relatively lower than in the other countries. The program tested and demonstrated, so in the field, so both actually on station and on farm, tested integrated systems, so management system, different agricultural management practices, of course, the traditional, let's say the improved management practices such as fertilized maize, rotation, intercropping, etc. But try to have these systems in integrated way rather than a specific siloed approach. Try to move away from the discrete technological innovation or bundle innovations. So in all this, policy coordination, so the coordination of policy across different actors, different stakeholders was key. Also to take advantage, also to benefit by synergies in the different elements. So how agricultural productivity is related to climate resilience, to also to social and human elements, to livelihoods, etc. So was key, and also something that I will highlight later on, the different interaction with the different actors, policymakers, as well as National Agricultural Research System. So we started, the diagram started from the left. So we started from demand-driven participatory approach, trying to validate this innovation for a small agricultural production system. So essentially, rural households, we were trying to encourage rural households and to actually to show more than encourage that to show them to be exposed to different practices without that is essentially increased yields from the same amount of land, so without compromising the needs of future generation, right? So the basic premise is that better efficiency also increases productivity as well as production, and then through that, then through markets, then also improved income and nutrition. So this would lead to an increase in general livelihoods. And we try to do it, of course, in a sustainable way across 5 different dimensions that I can show you here. So the 5 dimensions actually are at the bottom. So it's productivity, economic, social, human, and the environment that are symbolized by the icons over there. But I'm going to repeat it here essentially. So these are the 5 domains, 5 sustainable civilizations domains that we targeted that refer to the 3 biggest, let's say, domain or genetic, because through genetic gains, that how we increase productivity is a way to how to print productivity. Then socioeconomics, that includes social, human, and ecological, so the environmental benefits. So we developed the Sustainable Intensification Assessment Framework. That is a list that comprises a lot of indicators referred to the different domains. It's let's say a long list with calculation methods, with definitions and ontologies, etc. But in any case, these demand-driven solutions ensured in a way that solutions were locally owned, were locally appropriated. If you want, it's similar to agroecology, right? So agriculture and nature-based solutions. So the approach is quite similar. You know, this, as I was saying, coherence across different institutions and across different stakeholders and sectors was a key ingredient in scaling and ensuring impact. So I here put long-term impact, but in reality, we didn't test long-term impact. We didn't compute the long-term impact so far, but we are trying to follow up. So we have a medium-term impact this year in summer in one of the countries. But we essentially had a short to medium-term indication so far. So policy coherence, I won't be stressing enough. This project was a multi-stakeholder. We have a multi-stakeholder governance. So of course the main driver was the donor. That one master donor was USAID, and was a strict consultation between USAID and then CGI centers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the CG. So it's a consultative group of international agriculture research that is a network of 12 research institutions around the world. And not only this, so it was a multi-stakeholder, multi-CG centers, but also we we interacted a lot with governments, with non-governmental organizations, and also farmer groups. We were striving, actually, that's what our objective, to have consistency and alignment among the different components of the different actors. So between researchers in the global north, in the researchers in the global south, essential services, market, and also policies. And of course, the policies related to climate adaptation, because that's what we are talking about when we try to address long-term environmental sustainability. And the institutional coordination was strengthened by the stakeholder platform, innovation platform in the field among farmers. And also thanks to, of course, demand-driven and participatory research. And this particular aspect was facilitated by the factor that we enjoyed of the flexibility in the donor funding. That was one of the key ingredients for adaptive implementation and scaling also over time, because we had two phases. The first phase in 5 years, where we tested and validated these technologies and agricultural management practices, while the next 5 years were essentially to interact with policy makers and development partners to scale up. So I'm not going to go through that. It's a little bit, just to show you that we try to be as careful as possible, as quantitative as possible, and have evaluation design, a quantitative evaluation design. So we selected one Africa Rising Villages on one side and contributors on the other side. We collected baseline follow-up data in the 5 countries, not in Zambia, as I said, because we haven't collected data there. And we use experimental methods together with non-experimental methods. So we try to randomize the treated. So actually the sample of the treated, but we couldn't randomize the treatment. So we use so again, I'm not going to go through that, but just to show you that, trust me, that we try to apply our best methodology under these conditions, and we apply the propensity convention with the difference in different regression adjustment, controlling for conditions, for weather conditions that change over time. Sorry. So the results, these are on the right. You can see the diagram of the indicators that some of the indicators that we used in one case. I think there was the case of, I put here the case of Malawi, where we measured the impact of the project, so before and after, with or without, along the 5 domains, looking at different indicators, multiple indicators per domain. Just one dimension in the social, just as one indicator. Every other domain has more than one indicator, and this is just a selection. So in general, this is the case of Malawi. Sorry, probably I shouldn't report the most successful case, probably. But we had an increase in almost all the outcomes that we looked at. So productivity, crop yields, livestock, income, in household diversity, in food security. There was a reduction in soil erosion, increase of fertility management, increase also in social inclusion and gender equity. Here some of the results on gender social inclusion are summarized. So women farmers were more integrated into technology selection. So this way there also was an increase in adoption rate. We encourage nutrition sensitive agriculture that also improved household welfare. And there was an inclusive participation that actually was effective in scaling. And the fact that the community actually was the driving force behind the adoption at the household level. So in terms of, specifically in terms of institutional coordination, we reached 1 million scaling beneficiaries. Again, this is through partnerships, through development partners on the ground that were, as I said before, they were different in the different countries. Internally, our Africa Rising program try to disseminate, try to expose farmers to the technology using technology parks, lead farmers, so model farmers, extensions, traditional sanction system. And this strategy actually accelerated the dissemination adoption. together with capacity building. We had a lot of capacity building through national research systems, through local institutions, and integrating with existing local governments and national governments initiative NGO programs. Here I'm listing 3 examples of policy integration and uptake. One is the variety of common bin that was released by the government, that is known as NUA 45, that was later released by the government of Malawi as the CITED 09. Another example was the fertilizer hyper-local fertilizer recommendation in the Ethiopian highlands. And these recommendations were taken up by the newly established committee that include also members of the Ministry of Agriculture, National Agriculture Research System, and local universities. And also another example again in Malawi, where the government released in 2017 the official release of black legumes. So it's a combination between short-term and long-term legumes to improve soil fertility and human nutrition. A side note, this has not been possible, wouldn't have been possible without a good communication strategy. So I won't stress enough, I will never stress enough that without good communications, rice with rice science, also excellent science, will rest on the bookshelf and will not be translated into actionable research and development impact on the ground. So yes, pay attention to the policymaker. So to your document.
Sorry, Carlo, to interrupt. Sorry,
yes.
Can you round up in a minute?
Yes, sure. Yes, yeah. Yes. This is my last slide. Actually, I have one last slide, but it's quick. So document as you implement your project. Work with local partners. Use user-friendly platform and not complicated, sophisticated methods and algorithm. Policy recommendation, try to interact as much as possible with policymakers, both at the local level, as in this case, an example that the Dodoma Regional Commission in Tanzania presented our handbook on sustainable intensification. And finally, the sustainable intensification, but also agroecology and nature-based solutions that essentially are part of the green economy, indeed provide a scalable pathway for climate resilience development, but under certain conditions. We demonstrated that these approaches can simultaneously improve productivity without damaging and also increasing the natural resource base. But future policies need to prioritize cross-sectoral coordination, need to prioritize local knowledge, ownership, and inclusive stakeholder platform to have again, to increase the scaling effectiveness in the future. Thank you. And you can find some of the activities and the conclusions in clicking on the report there, the link below. Thank you. Sorry for
right. Thank you very much, Carlo. If you could copy the link into the chat box, yes, that would be great, so that we can have access. Thank you. Yep. So we have 2 more presentations, and then we'll then quickly move on to the Q&A. Can I invite Dr. Jama Mashele Mohale to she's carry on from where Dr. Cecy ended with a different perspective. Dr. Mohale, over to you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to our viewers or listeners. As Dr. Cecy mentioned earlier, we are looking at green technologies and innovations that are adapted for rural livelihoods, just to really sort of strengthen their farming against climatic changes and all of those issues. So I thought it would be important just to define what we mean when we talk about green technologies, and those are any innovation or tech that is developed to mitigate against climate change or environmental loss or degradation. And this, in terms of being green, just looks at a more sustainable way of doing that. And we're looking at rural communities or rural farmers. So I also thought the things that we can put forward are things that are affordable, because our rural farmers usually farm on a small scale, and by small scale I mean between 0 to 2, and we can stretch it to 5 hectare or 4 hectare, and it differs depending on where they are. So I just wanted to just maybe sort of give them in different categories. So we can look at renewable energy. Yeah, we know our solar and our wind, but not everyone can actually access these types of technologies. We can look at waste to energy, which would be your biogas. We can look at post-harvest management as also ways that the small-scale farmers can better buffer themselves against climatic change, or adopt climate smart ways of doing their farming. So I thought maybe to give it a figure, to say we will look at technologies that you don't actually need to go over 50,000 rands, well, in South African rands. So I thought, for example, technologies would include, or innovations would be rainwater harvesting. That's something that is doable. You find that people have or can purchase JoJo tanks and harvest rainwater from roofs, be it at a school, be it at a church, be it even at home, that they can use for their farming systems. This, in a way, reduces the water costs. You can also look at things like mulching, that also then reduces the amount of water that is lost from the soil. Again, that goes back to you not needing to water as much. And because we are in such a climate that sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't, you need to be prepared for just about anything. Another way that farmers can go about this is planting climate resilient plants, and that then links into indigenous crops. And I know that cash crops are usually and I'm giving the South African context, like your spinach, onions, tomatoes, and all of that, but those are not necessarily resilient against the climate. So we can then, as farmers, look at planting crops like sorghum, which is also higher nutritionally as opposed to maize. We can also plant cassava, which I know in South Africa is not as big, but actually also has so many more uses than the maize that we are used to. And also then cover cropping, incorporating different crops with what farmers are currently doing, just to better increase the resilience of the soil. Because if your soil is good, then also a lot more of what you're producing, the yield can also increase. Looking at more like even using compost as opposed to your chemical fertilizer. As now we know, with the war and all of it, all prices are super high. The cost of fertilizer is extremely high. So I think that's also a wake-up call to rather not rely on those type of inputs. And I know it's a journey to move from being reliant on something like that. But we are living in a time where we need to adapt. And I think farmers are very good at that, and they need to be ready. And I mean, things cost a lot now. So if you can use the natural things around you, then why not do something like that? I just want to just revise my notes a bit to add on to the different types of technologies as well that I mentioned, the rainwater harvesting, the mulching, but we can also then the post-harvest waste. So a lot of the produce or the yields that comes from farms is lost because a lot of farmers don't necessarily have access to cold rooms or storage, or you find that where they are is very far away from where they need to take that produce. So another way that they can add value to that is diversify towards agro-processing. And drying is also something that, I mean, our grandmothers used to do. I grew up eating like this the dried vegetables. So they'd cook a bunch of it and dry it out, preparing for the winter. That's still something that could be adopted just to better buffer our farmers against climate and unforeseeable things such as the war. I mentioned biogas. That's also something that I think the tech also has. There is the high end one where it's quite costly, and then there's ones that you can use at home. So waste is really valuable. I think be it fresh produce or even waste from like what you call animals or livestock that can be turned into biogas that you can then rechannel into other uses on the farm. So just another way again that we can think about, or that we can as farmers sort of diversify, is then also our relationship with water, drip irrigation. And I found innovations where people use plastic bottles and they just make little holes on there to make sure, because they cannot afford the fancy drip irrigations, use that as a way of watering. That's another thing that we can think of. I mentioned composting, livestock, so diversifying the farm as well, not just focusing on one crop. And I know that at the end of the day, profit is what we're looking for, but diversifying our crops with our environment in various ways, be it cover cropping, mulching, a bit of livestock there, your chickens, your whatnot, it builds your resilience and therefore makes you better adapted towards climatic disruptions. And I think I'll just end off with that. I did mention the renewable energy, the solar and wind. Those are great, but not everyone can afford. So the whole angle that I was coming at was just looking at things that rural farmers can really afford that won't break that bank. So even if it means banking together or asking for a loan from your family to in a way that can just allow you to just better cushion yourself, be it rainwater tanks and those things. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohale. Thank you. That was really brilliant. Okay, I'll hand over to last speaker, last but not least, Dr. Devandran Pillay. I hope I pronounced your name properly. Sorry if I murdered that. So the topic will be financing and implementation pathways for community-level green initiatives. Over to you, Dr. Pillay.
Thank you, Olayinka. And correction there, I'm Mr. Devon Pillay. I'm
okay, maybe I'm giving you a doctorate in advance.
Presidential Commission, and I don't want to take credit for the hard work that people have to go through to get a PhD.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the presenters and to the participants of the webinar. Some very insightful presentations have been made, and I think there's a lot of learnings that we could pick up on. Just to preface my presentation, right? So I'm trying to contextualize and draw the nexus between climate finance and community-led green initiatives. I want to start off with a particular context of South Africa, where this is largely geared towards responding to the South African socioeconomic challenges. So as many of you may know, we have a chronic unemployment situation in South Africa that we've not been able to significantly address post-democracy. Likewise, poverty remains a very critical a social condition that we still want to resolve. And we view the just transition as a whole of society shift that takes into account the economy and social issues. And in implementing a just transition, we seek to address two things. One, the adverse impacts that may emerge as a result of the transition, and two, respond to the deep social and economic challenges that we've experienced. So I just a quick highlight of the presentation. I'm going to speak to climate finance flows, speak to a just transition, and community agency around the just transition. Just at a very high level, speak through some of the climate finance flows for Africa. And what we see very clearly is that 87% of the climate finance flows into Africa are from international partners. Around 10% are from domestic institutions, Critically important from the international partners, we find that 43% of those are for multilateral DFIs, 22% from international governments, and 13% from bilateral DFIs. When we look at instruments, a lot of the funding has been channeled into grants, which is around 32%, concessional loans, which is generally your cheaper loans, well below market rates, around 26%, and 25% of your total climate finance flows have gone into market-related instruments. Interestingly, of the $43 billion, 46% of that flowed into mitigation issues and to resolve mitigation matters. Around 32% went in to respond to adaptation issues, and 21% was directed to dual benefits. What we do see very clearly, though, is that in terms of your sectors, sorry, can you still see me? See this presentation?
Yes, we can see, yeah.
Good. So in terms of your sectors, you have a fairly good distribution between energy, your economic sectors, your agricultural land issues, transport issues, and then as you move lower, you get lower percentages being demonstrated. But what's critical is Africa is on the right path towards financing the right instruments, providing the right infrastructure and the right interventions to lead to a low carbon society. And we're all aware that Africa is the least polluting continent. Moving on to South Africa, which is a slightly different picture. I mean, we have a significant impact in terms of carbon emissions. Much of our climate finance flows comes from domestic sources. A lot of them from the private sector and a substantial amount from international public sector. The key instruments that we have is debt and equity, but you would notice here under uses, the overwhelming majority had moved into mitigation. And this is responding to clean energy issues around energy efficiency, etc. And a very, very small portion of that has been directed to adaptation issues. And that's a big challenge that South Africa is currently facing, is how do we get sufficient resources flowing to adaptation so we can respond appropriately to adaptation matters. So in a snapshot, what we're seeing is there's a financing gap in South Africa of 203 to 404 billion rand required per annum for our total financial needs. Market debt and equity is the dominant financing instrument. Interestingly, though, in the last 2 years, about 16 billion rand has been directed to interventions around the just transition. And just transition interventions speak to issues around skills development, SMME support, reindustrialization, and economic diversification. Just to speak through how we envisage a just transition, I mean, I'm not going to go into too much about it, but just to effectively say, we deeply embed procedural justice in all our initiatives, all our programs, and all our projects in order to achieve both distributive justice and very, very critically, the restorative justice. So the three justices are deeply embedded in our transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy and society. Now, how do we measure a just transition? We want to ensure that all South Africans have a better life. We want to ensure that we move towards eradication of poverty, the social inclusion, and the decent work agenda is deeply embedded in all jobs going forward. Decision making is centered around all stakeholders. In particular, the poor, women, and youth must have a voice in this transition. So in terms of planning for the just transition, these are some of the key pillars that we look at. We look at labor market. What would the future economy look like? And based on what the future economy looks and feels, gear the labor market to meet those demands. And this particularly speaks to our upskilling and reskilling program in order to absorb our 30+% unemployment that we have in South Africa. Social protection is critical. I mean, we have a fairly sophisticated social protection system. But when you look at the just transition and you look at the closure of sectors such as the coal value chain, the auto sector, etc., many of the workers, particularly in the coal value chain, and in particular mine workers, earn a significantly higher salary than most workers in the same skills level. So when these workers need to transition, and if they are not transitioning to a new mine or an existing mine, the potential or possibility of a lower salary is quite high. So when we look at social protection, we look at it within that whole scope of how do you ensure workers are not left worse off. We also look at how do you help workers to transition to new economic activity. And it's not just workers that are directly employed that have that meet the decent work agenda, but those that are involved in the informal sector, the SMMEs that are involved in the informal sector, all of those livelihoods would have been lost. So we have put together as the PCC a recommendation on a comprehensive social security for the just transition, and that can be found in our PCC website. Governance becomes critically important, the role of all three tiers of government, how you're building ESG reporting, how do you better improve climate disclosure and emissions reporting. And lastly, in order to achieve this, the big pillar is how does climate finance flows? Does it flow in the right to the right initiatives? Is it responding to the just transition? And is it landing where we would experience the greatest impact? So just to give you an indication of our thinking around when we look at the just transition, and I'm mentioning this for the third time, when we speak about a just transition, we are talking about a just transition to a low carbon, climate resilient economy. What you're seeing up here is it's two pictorials of a single province, which is in Mpumalanga, and that's highlighted in the dark blue lines. On the left hand side, you would see that by 2050, Mpumalanga will experience temperature increases of up to 3 degrees Celsius. At the same time, you're going to see a significant drop in rainfall, up to 3 millimeters per year. However, on the southern west of Mpumalanga, you are going to experience some increases in rain patterns. But this would not be a steady flow, over 2 or 3 days. But this is more likely to be high levels, intense storms over a very, very short period of time. So this is what modeling is telling us. And why this is important is it guides us in terms of our planning for the economic diversification, as well as industrial policy around agriculture, around transportation, etc. What we do know, though, as a matter of fact emerging from modeling work, is that while South Africa will lose a significant number of jobs, the shift to a low carbon economy and society will be a net job creator of anything between 600,000 jobs to 1.4 million jobs. So different models are giving us different figures, but that's the range in which we are looking at. A minimum of 600,000 jobs being created over the next 5 to 7 years. Sectors that will be significantly and adversely impacted will be basic chemicals, coal, petroleum, sectors that we will find significant increases. It will be in the platinum, metal and ore, hydrogen, fuel cell, and electrolysis. So how does South Africa's green transition, what does it look like? What are these opportunities? Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. We've picked up a list of them, but just to indicate, mining around critical minerals has become the next big area of focus for economic diversification, beneficiation of critical minerals, green manufacturing, the new energy vehicles and the supply chains linked to the new energy vehicles. Hydrogen is flagged as a massive potential for South Africa, and we're expecting this to be built out largely in the west coast of South Africa. A green steel is a huge opportunity. So is aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel. Potentials lies around the cement industry, but critically is road and public transport. And this is going to have a significant impact in terms of carbon emissions as we improve rail infrastructure. From an employment and a mass job creator, we are looking at nature-based solutions linked to localities and linked to livelihoods. So more than, as I mentioned, looking at these opportunities, we're expecting more than 5 million jobs to be created, about 30% fewer people living in poverty, and it'll have a significant impact on health and the impacts are around the deaths related to emissions. So how do we build in agency? And this is community agency around building in livelihoods linked to the just transition. So one, we speak about what we consider to be collective impact. And that's building an ecosystem made up of the communities, local government, the private sector, and trade unions, where they collectively identify new value chains, new opportunities, how you can expand existing opportunities, and lift this up. And when lifting it up, you would pick up opportunities that can create a big bang in terms of the economy. So that's your massive industrial opportunities. You would also then pick up livelihood opportunities. And these would be opportunities that are linked to improving income levels of households or the broader community. Obviously, project size and complexities would differ, but this is done through collective action. Communities will ensure, through an extensive engagement with stakeholders, through a systematic approach that's geographically located. So this is not a national intervention. This will have to be an intervention based at local level. So it's either at a community level, at a ward level, or at a local government level. It could even go as large as being at a district level. What would happen is these partners will identify what are current competencies, what efficiencies they have, what skills they have, based on natural resources, identify these opportunities. So just to give you a quick highlight of something that we've picked up in the work that we've been doing in the province of Mpumalanga.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you round up in a minute so that we can have some minutes for questions and answers?
Sorry, I was told I had 20 minutes. Okay,
it's 12 minutes. 12 minutes.
No, I'm talking about what I received on email. Apologies. Okay, so effectively, all of these decisions that emanate from communities are based on research. They're evidence based. So other programs that we have emerging is around social ownership. You have renewables plants that are being developed largely by international funders, and these are massive plants. We've now built in a program that we're now rolling out throughout the country that looks at socially owned renewable energy plants. So these plants are either owned by communities, owned by workers, or they could be owned by local government. And we build out governance structures, funding models, look at technical specifications, etc. So I'll conclude with the slide, some critical points around the community funding agency. It's important that you identify the right product or service offering. You'll link this with a very detailed business case, a pre-feasibility and a comprehensive feasibility and bankability. All can be funded through grant funding as long as the project demonstrates demand and demonstrates long-term sustainability. On building out the opportunity, there's funding available through either concessional loans, commercial loans, or finance loans. I was going to build this out a little better, but apologies. I'm going to stop here so that we can have some time for questions. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to all our presenters. If you would, if you don't mind, if you can wait for another 15 minutes, so that we can have some time for questions and answers. I have some questions for the presenters, and then anyone that has a question should please also just raise your hand with the icon on the computer, and then I'll call you after this. To Cecy, you mentioned that the beneficiaries are few. Can you briefly explain why there are few beneficiaries? Is it because of awareness, or is this because of any structural problem with the implementation? To Carlo, very interesting project. And I was just wondering about the area of sustainability. You mentioned that some of the funding comes from USAID. How sustainable is this project? Because we've seen a lot of projects across the continent that just collapse when funding stops. The same question also goes to Devandran. How sustainable is this project when funding ends? And then to Dr. Mohale, you mentioned several interesting initiatives. Are there structures in place to enlighten small-scale rural farmers? You mentioned that most of the farmers are small-scale. And then one more question to Mr. Devandran. I was wondering, what can we learn from the South African experience? What can other African countries learn from South Africa? If you could take these questions, and then we'll then open up to any other questions that we have online. Thank you.
Okay, let me start since you asked mine first. Thank you very much, Dr. Olayinka. Yeah, so for the initiative of the agency, what they did was that the communities where they have these interventions, or the beneficiaries of these interventions, they have, like I mentioned, different programs. And then in some communities, they pick 5 persons for each program in the particular intervention, doing that for several people. So where you have a community running into thousands, and you pick only 5 people to benefit from an intervention, the communities might be diverse, but how many people per community? That is my query here. That's where 5 people in the community benefit from different programs. Can that actually drive the bigger picture of addressing livelihood issues at the community level? So that's the crucial question coming from that limited sample for benefiting from the programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Azzarri?
Yes. Yes. No. So the question on the sustainability of financing, especially, so the economic sustainability of the project itself. Yeah, I completely agree. This was one of the earlier questions I had also myself for the project implementers. So I was not a direct project implementer. It was more an evaluator of the project. And what I can say is that the intervention was mostly focused around training and testing these agriculture management practices, validating and demonstrating these technologies to the farmers through technology parks, lead farmers, mother and baby trials, etc. So it was not around providing, for example, improved seeds or fertilizer or pesticides to the farmers, but was exposing them to the benefits of agriculture management practices that could be also basic management practice, such as intercropping, maize legume intercropping, or rotation, or seasonal rotation of crops. So I agree that if they are too much supply driven and they are too much linked to specific inputs, then their sustainability in the long term would be undermined. And that's why also there was a great level of adaptations from farmers. And there was a strong emphasis on agriculture management practice that wouldn't rely on inputs, for example, conservation agriculture. Yeah, understand that it's also fertilizer, involves the use of fertilizer, but it's mostly no-till, residue management, leaving residue on the field, etc. So yes, the question is still there, but that's why we need to test more than provide in a supply-driven way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlo. Can we move on to Dr. Mohale?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity once again. So the center, I'm a postdoc at the University of Johannesburg. Our center, the Center for Ecological Intelligence, we demonstrate, we do research, but we also demonstrate different forms of farming. So we've got hydroponics, aquaponics, composting, seedlings, and we also grow on the ground. That facility is open to farmers. So you get farmers coming into the university to see the different ways of agroecology. So the mulching, we demonstrate that. The composting, we demonstrate that. Rainwater harvesting, we demonstrate that. But we also collaborate with various farmers around, we're based in Johannesburg, so around this area, and even in Mpumalanga, and even in Limpopo, we do reach out and engage with farmers on different ways, or rather, making sure that this information is accessible. And that's why I also talked about bringing forward things that are affordable, because you are addressing a group that is still growing and funds are not always easily accessible. So yes, we do collaborate. We've also hosted a number of webinars where we engage with farmers from different countries, and the whole aim was to showcase how farmers can better buffer themselves against climatic changes, or even water and water shortages and all of that, or how to better build resilience into their soil. So as much as we can, we are trying to engage with as many farmers as possible on different platforms. So even short learning programs, we are expanding into that, and workshops where farmers can actually come through and engage with us and see what other ways they can better prepare themselves.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Just one more thing on that before I let you go. In a lot of parts of West Africa, they work with farmer cooperatives. So I don't know if you do that already, but it's something that you can think about, because I remember about 20 years ago, I worked on helping farmers in northern Nigeria establish cooperatives so that these kind of practices could then be taken to the cooperatives, and it was very, very effective. So that's something that we could catch up on later.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, let me move on to Mr. Pillay.
Olayinka, very interesting question. What you could learn from South Africa, and I'm not too sure whether there's much to learn from South Africa, right? There's a lot of work and there's a lot of literature around this. So there's some great experiences that's coming out of South Africa, Senegal, Egypt, etc. I think one of the things that we can lift out, that we can share quite substantive information on, is the new country platforms, which is now the new instrument to fund climate change initiatives, which is also linked to individual countries' developmental objectives. So there's a lot of literature around there that we have, and happy to share that, and also do connects when necessary. I think we can possibly also share some of the modeling work that we've done. There's a lot of modeling work that we've done on the energy side, and quite a substantial amount of work that we've done on the economic side. And what's quite interesting is something that we're doing more recently is on economic complexity, which shows and demonstrates new products that can be developed from existing capabilities, economic capabilities. So I think, from learning perspectives, there may be one or two things, but I think sharing, there's a lot more to share out there than, and also South Africa's learning. We're also learning from Egypt, etc. And I think this is a cross-pollination, an area where there's a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of learnings that guides each country going forward. In terms of sustainability, and I think you've hit it on the head, how do we ensure projects remain sustainable? Because what tends to happen in South Africa is once funding dries up, projects come to an end. And we've seen that consistently. So what we've embedded in the projects going forward is you must demonstrate through a business case there is demand for the product or service offering. So even if it is beekeeping, demonstrate there's what's the demand, local demand, domestic demand as in South Africa, regional demand, global demand for honey. And then once you be able to demonstrate that, then we go into a full feasibility for you to build out the project. So funding is limited. We've got very limited funding, particularly within grants. So that money must be channeled into the best opportunities that are emerging. And one of the speakers spoke about new innovation, new technology, and that's one of the key focus that we have. And what we are seeing is a lot of youth are driving these initiatives, which is quite substantive when you look at it from an economic perspective within particular geographies. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, really fascinating stuff there. Do we have any other questions from the participants online? Okay, I think we have one question in the chat. This question is for Dr. Cecy Balogun. They're asking what types of employment opportunities were created for youth in your study context? What aspects of the intervention led to the creation of employment opportunities? Dr. Cecy, do you want to answer this question? She back on. Okay. I can say she's struggling with. Are you back on?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, please. Can you answer that question?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Justin. Primarily, some of the young people were employed as forest guards, in building, creating opportunities for them into what I would call like a formal system, in the bid to restore the forest environment in that area. But others, I wouldn't want to strictly subscribe to the extent to which that can be called employment, because that was also informal. For instance, since we were empowered with capacity building and then given starter packs, some of them were taught how to diversify into beekeeping, which they were not doing in that area. Some were not into poultry production. They were given starter packs to start poultry. Some were given animals like cows, goats, to be self-sustaining. And then for some of the women that were given energy-saving cooking stoves, some of them went into food selling, cooked food selling and all of that. And some that were given solar power support system, they run charging of mobile devices and small businesses within their communities. So yes, from the capacity building programs, that gave them the knowledge to diversify. And then starter packs, like I mentioned, also gave them a step ahead to be able to have something doing. And thirdly, the people empowered with either, like I mentioned, the women, and for some that were also supported to establish fruit orchards. But I can't say that this has started producing, because as of when I did that research some 2 years ago, I think that was about 5 years that the intervention has been running in some of the communities. But at least they already have some progress from where they were in terms of creating employment opportunities for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other question? Can the presenters, if there's any link you want to share, Mr. Pillay mentioned some of the work being done. If you could just copy in the links into the chat box so that people online can follow the links and can see some of the work you're doing, that would be great. Do we have any other question? Anna, do you have a question, or do you want to round up for us if there are no questions?
So okay. Thanks. Yeah, I think We are good. So thanks a lot everyone for joining. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and stay updated on upcoming events. So next month we're gonna have a webinar on water.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Dr. Ajala, for your
Thank you.
coordination. Yeah, bye.
Okay, all right. Yeah.